Welcome to Coco Tales Reddit, where we untangle the messy, beautiful, and sometimes heartbreaking threads of our shared human experience. It's funny how a single sentence, just a handful of words, can sometimes feel heavier than a lifetime of struggle. You carry it with you, a little stone in your pocket that you touch from time to time, just to feel its sharp edges and remember. Have you ever felt like you're playing a part in someone else's movie? Like you're the supporting character in your own life, reading lines you never would have written for yourself? That's where I've been living for the past 3 years, ever since my divorce. I'm 45 years old, and honestly, I thought I was past the age of high school level drama, but I guess life always has a surprise for you. My story really begins, or maybe ends, with my son Taylor. He's 19 now, a sophomore in college, and the center of my world. When his mother, Sarah, and I split up, it was messy. That's probably an understatement. She made it her mission to paint me as the villain of our story, and she used our son as her primary canvas. Every little frustration, every disagreement we ever had, was twisted into a narrative of my failure. A year ago, Sarah remarried a guy named Brad. Brad is, well, he's exactly the kind of guy you'd imagine. He's a sales executive who wears his success like a second skin, all expensive suits and a shiny BMW. He's flashy, and to Taylor, he's a hero. My son worships him, and in the bright, glaring light of Brad's success, I've become a shadow. It's not that I'm struggling. I'm an electrical engineer, I make good money, and my house is paid off. I have a solid, stable life, but I don't wear designer clothes or drive a luxury car. I drive a practical sedan that gets me from point A to point B. In Taylor's eyes, thanks to a steady drip of poison from his mother, this makes me a loser. The irony is that I'm the one funding his entire college life. His tuition at a private university, his room and board, his books, all of it. It was my idea to put it in the divorce agreement, because I wanted to ensure that no matter what happened between Sarah and me, Taylor's future would be secure. It cost me about $30,000 a year, but I've never once complained. I wanted him to have the best. I even bought him a car for college, a reliable used Honda, something practical and safe for a student. Of course, it wasn't good enough. He wanted a BMW like Brad's. Every conversation we had somehow circled back to Brad. The incredible trips Brad took him on. The designer clothes Brad bought him. The weekend visits we were supposed to have, our court-mandated father-son time, became exercises in my own patience. I'd try to do things we used to love, like fishing, but the whole time it would be about how Brad has a better boat or how much more exciting his trips are. It felt like 18 years of being a dedicated father every baseball game. Every parent-teacher conference had been erased because I chose financial stability over flash. The toxic atmosphere during his visits was becoming unbearable. He'd show up with this sullen attitude, acting like being at my home was a prison sentence. All while living comfortably off the money I worked so hard to provide. My hard work was paying for his tuition, his dorm, his meal plan, his clothes, but in his mind, I was the one holding him back. About a month ago, I decided to try one more time to break through to him. I made a reservation at a nice Italian restaurant he used to love when he was a kid, a place filled with what I thought were good memories. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, we could have one evening without the drama. For the first half hour, it almost worked. He seemed to be in a better mood, and we were actually talking about his engineering classes. He was excited about a project, and for a few minutes, I saw a glimpse of the son I used to know. It felt like we were finally connecting. And then, it happened. He started talking about a trip to Europe that Sarah and Brad were taking him on for spring break. He described it in lavish detail, the five-star hotels, the exotic locations. He spoke about Brad with a reverence that was like a knife in my gut. This is where I made my mistake. I asked a simple question. Was Brad paying for this, or was it coming out of the college fund I provide? His face darkened instantly. He got defensive, snapping that it was none of my business how Brad spent his money. He said Brad was generous, unlike some people. From there, it was a downward spiral. The car came up again, how Brad would have bought him something better than an old Honda. He painted me as stingy and boring, while Brad was successful, fun, and everything a father should be. The injustice of it was burning a hole in my chest. Brad had been in his life for less than 2 years and only ever had to be the fun guy. Brad never had to walk the floors with a sick toddler or spend hours on homework. He just had to show up with gifts. The tension at our table was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. Our voices were rising, and I could see people at other tables starting to look over. I was being publicly humiliated by my own child, the one I was paying to feed at that very moment. And then came the final blow. Loud enough for everyone around us to hear, he leaned forward, a smug, defiant look on his face. At least Mom's new husband isn't a loser like you. The world just stopped. The clatter of forks and quiet chatter of the restaurant faded into a dull roar in my ears. He said it. The word I knew he was thinking, the word his mother had fed him. He'd finally said it out loud, and in that moment, watching the other diners stare with a mixture of pity and shock, all I felt was a profound, deafening silence. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, the echo of my son's voice carving out a hollow space inside my chest. The other diners, who had been subtle in their eavesdropping before, were now openly staring. I felt their pity like a physical weight on my shoulders. Taylor's expression had shifted slightly, a flicker of something, maybe awareness that he'd finally gone too far, but it was buried under a mountain of defiance. He was testing me, pushing to see where my breaking point was. I signaled for the check, my movements feeling stiff and robotic. The waiter, a young man about Taylor's age, came over, his eyes full of a sympathy that was almost harder to bear than the stares. He'd heard it all. Even a complete stranger knew how deeply wrong that comment was. I paid, we left, and the car ride back to his dorm was a cocoon of suffocating silence. He didn't apologize. I dropped him off, muttered something about seeing him in 2 weeks, and he just shrugged before walking away without a backward glance. That night, alone in my house, the silence was even louder. His word, loser, ricocheted off the walls of every room. A loser. After all the sacrifices, all the overtime I'd worked to give him the best education money could buy, all the years of being there for every scraped knee and school play, this was his verdict on my life. It was a judgment delivered with the casual cruelty only a child can inflict on a parent. I paced the floors for hours, a movie of the last 3 years playing in my head. Every disrespectful comment, every dismissive shrug, every glowing comparison to Brad. I saw it all with a horrifying new clarity. I had been so desperate to be the good dad after the divorce, so terrified of losing him completely, that I had allowed this to happen. I had let him and his mother create a dynamic where I was nothing more than a bank account, a utility to be used but never appreciated. I thought about the hypocrisy of it all. He lived this comfortable, privileged life, a private university, a car, spending money all funded by the loser he so openly despised. I realized with a sickening lurch that I had failed him. Not by failing to provide, I had done that to a fault, but by failing to teach him the most basic human values: respect, gratitude, and the simple truth that actions have consequences. I had been so focused on giving him a good life that I forgot to teach him how to be a good man. Sometime before dawn, the storm of anger and grief inside me subsided, and what was left was a calm, cold resolve. The engineer in me took over. I saw the problem not as a messy family drama, but as a flawed system. The input was my unconditional financial support. The output was escalating disrespect. The system was failing, and the only logical step was a hard reboot. I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose. I made my coffee and sat down at my desk. My first call was to the bank. I calmly told the customer service representative that I needed to remove an authorized user from my credit card account. There was no fraud, I explained. Just a simple account change. It was done in minutes. My second call was to the university's treasurer's office. I was the primary payer on Taylor's account, and I exercised my right to put a hold on all new charges until they could be reviewed by me personally. The administrator politely informed me that this would mean Taylor's meal plan and other campus services would be inaccessible until the hold was lifted. I said I understood perfectly. My third call was to my auto insurance company. I had Taylor's Honda removed from my policy, effective immediately. Finally, I took my spare key and drove to his campus. The Honda was sitting right where he always parked it in the student lot. The car was in my name, titled and registered to me. He was just the authorized driver. I had every legal right to be there. I got in, the seats still adjusted for his frame, and I drove it off campus without a second thought. As I drove home, a wave of profound sadness washed over me. This wasn't something I wanted to do. This wasn't the kind of father I ever imagined I'd be. But I had been left with no other choice. Words hadn't worked. Pleading hadn't worked. My quiet, steady presence hadn't worked. It was time for him to see what life was like without the support of the loser he so casually dismissed. By noon, his entire financial safety net had vanished. His car was gone. His credit card was useless. And his student account was a brick wall. I didn't call him to tell him why. I figured a smart college kid could put the pieces together. I parked the Honda in my garage and went inside. The house was quiet, but it felt like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy and charged with unspoken energy. For a moment, a wave of doubt washed over me. Had I been too harsh? Was I about to ruin my relationship with my son permanently over one stupid, hurtful comment? But then, I remembered the look on his face. It wasn't just the word loser that had done the damage. It was the smug satisfaction with which he delivered it. It was the culmination of months, no, years, of chipping away at my authority and my worth as his father. This wasn't a punishment. It was a course correction. I had let the ship drift for far too long, and it was time to take the wheel, no matter how rough the seas got. I didn't have to wait long. The first text messages started rolling in around lunchtime. I watched them appear on my screen, my phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. "Dad, where's my car? Seriously not funny." An hour later, "Okay, I need my car. I have to get to my part-time job later. Where is it?" Then, a new wave of confusion. "My card just got declined at the cafeteria. What is going on? Call me." I let the messages pile up. I didn't answer the first few frantic calls from his number either. I knew he needed to sit with this confusion for a while. He needed to connect the dots on his own. If I called and explained, it would just turn into another argument where he'd twist my words and paint me as the villain. This time, the actions had to speak for themselves. By late afternoon, the calls started coming from my ex-wife, Sarah. The first voicemail she left was pure fury. "Call me right now," she seethed. "What have you done? Taylor is a mess. You can't just cut him off like this." I let that one go too. An hour later, another one. This time, her voice was tight with panic. He can't buy food. His friends had to loan him money for dinner, and his car is gone. Did you take his car? This is insane. Call me back. The voicemails kept coming, each one more frantic than the last. By the third one, she was practically begging, and I could hear Taylor sobbing in the background. That sound, hearing my son cry like that, sent a pang of fatherly guilt through me, so sharp it almost made me buckle. Part of me wanted to pick up the phone, fix everything, and make the pain stop. But the other, clearer part of me knew that this pain was the entire point. This was the consequence he had earned. When Sarah called for the 6th time, her name flashing on my screen, I finally answered. I took a deep breath and prepared for the onslaught. "What did you do?" she shrieked, not even bothering with a hello. "Why are you doing this to him? He's hysterical. He doesn't understand what's happening." I kept my voice perfectly calm and level. "Sarah," I said, "Taylor made it very clear last night how he feels about me. He thinks I'm a loser who doesn't deserve his respect." There was a moment of stunned silence on her end. "So," I continued, "I decided that if that's how he truly feels, then he no longer needs or deserves financial support from someone he considers so worthless." The dam broke. She started screaming about our divorce agreement, about my legal obligation to pay for his education. "You can't just stop paying because your feelings got hurt," she yelled. "This is about more than hurt feelings, Sarah," I said. My voice still quiet, but now with an edge of steel I hadn't used with her in years. This is about respect. Is it really too much to ask for basic human decency in exchange for $30,000 a year? She tried to pivot. "He's just a teenager. He didn't mean it." "He's 19 years old and in his 2nd year of college, Sarah," I countered. "He's an adult. He's more than old enough to understand that you don't bite the hand that feeds you." Her tactics shifted again, from anger to tears. She started crying about how this would ruin his future, how I was destroying his education over something so petty. He should have thought about his future before he called me a loser in a crowded restaurant, I said simply. The conversation ended with her screaming another string of insults before hanging up on me. I stared at my phone, the silence of the house rushing back in. I knew this was far from over. This was just the first wave, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. The following day, the phone rang again. This time, when I saw Sarah's name, I had a feeling it wouldn't just be her on the line. I was right. After a brief, cold greeting from her, a man's voice, smooth and confident, came on the speaker. It was Brad. "Hey, man," he started, his tone dripping with a practiced, casual charm. "Sarah told me about the situation. Sounds like things got a little heated. I just want to play peacemaker here. Maybe we can all just calm down and work something out." He was trying to position himself as the reasonable adult, the one who could mediate between the two emotional, squabbling parents. I could almost picture him on the other end, leaning back in an expensive office chair, flashing a winning smile at Sarah as he prepared to solve her little problem for her. "Taylor's a good kid," Brad went on. "He's really torn up about what he said. I think he's learned his lesson, and he's very sorry for what happened at dinner." I let him finish his little speech. I listened to the smooth, conciliatory words, the empty platitudes about lessons learned. For months, this man had stood by silently, or worse, actively encouraged my son's disrespect. He had basked in the glow of being the cool stepdad, all while I paid the bills that made Taylor's privileged life, and by extension Brad's fun excursions with him, possible. When he was done, I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just made him a very simple, very reasonable offer. Brad, I said, my voice as calm as his, I appreciate you stepping in. And if you really believe that Taylor has learned his lesson, that's great news. In that case, you are more than welcome to take over paying for his college expenses. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had heard in 3 years. It was a long, heavy silence. I could hear the faint sound of breathing on the other end of the line, but nothing else. The great peacemaker, the generous and successful Brad, was suddenly at a loss for words. His generosity, it turned out, had its limits. And those limits were drawn precisely at the point where it required him to spend his own money. All this time, it was easy for him to be the hero, buying designer clothes and planning fun trips, because he knew I was covering the big-ticket items, the $30,000 a year in tuition, the housing, the food. Faced with the actual cost of the lifestyle, he was so happy to criticize me for not providing. His true colors bled through the phone line. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah snatched the phone back. Her voice was shaking with rage. "You can't do this! We have an agreement! I'm calling my lawyer!" "Go ahead," I said, my patience finally wearing thin. "Have your lawyer call my lawyer. The agreement says I pay for his education. It says nothing about me having to tolerate endless disrespect and public humiliation in exchange for that support. I'm willing to argue in court that expecting my own son not to call me a loser is a reasonable condition for my continued financial assistance." After that, the calls started coming from my own family. My mother called, her voice fraught with worry for Taylor, but she also admitted she understood my position. She'd seen Taylor's attitude toward me at family gatherings and had even told me privately that something needed to give. My older sister was torn. She fretted about Taylor's future, but then confessed that if one of her own kids had spoken to her that way, she would have probably reacted even more harshly. The most validating call came from my brother. There was no hesitation in his voice. "It's about time," he said. "I support you 100%. That kid needed a reality check, and you're the only one who could give it to him." Hearing their voices, their mixed but ultimately understanding perspectives, felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't just overreacting. I wasn't being a petty, vengeful father. I was a parent who had finally, belatedly, established a boundary. And as the day ended, I felt more certain than ever that I had done the right thing. The storm wasn't over, but I was no longer standing in it alone. For 3 days, a tense silence settled over my life. The angry calls and frantic texts stopped. My family, having said their piece, left me to it. I knew this quiet was just the eye of the storm. Sarah and Brad had failed to move me. Now it was up to Taylor. The entire situation hinged on his next move. A part of me feared he would just dig in his heels, letting his pride and his mother's influence sever our relationship for good. On the evening of the 3rd day, my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the conversation that would decide everything. I took a deep breath, steeled myself for another barrage of anger or demands, and answered. I said his name, and the sound that came back over the line wasn't anger. It was a broken sob. "Dad?" he choked out, his voice thick with tears. "Dad? I'm so sorry." Hearing him cry, not with the performative frustration I'd heard in the background of Sarah's calls, but with what sounded like genuine, soul-deep despair, instantly disarmed me. The cold wall of my resolve didn't crumble, but a door opened in it. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. The conversation that followed lasted for nearly an hour. Through his tears, he told me everything that had happened over the last 3 days. He told me about the humiliation of having his card declined when he tried to buy a sandwich on campus. He described having to borrow $20 from his roommate just to eat. He told me about having to walk for miles in the pouring rain to get to his part-time job because his car was gone. He talked about his friends, how some were understanding, but how others looked at him differently now that his easy access to money had vanished. He had to explain why he suddenly couldn't pay his share when they went out, why his car was gone. For the first time in his privileged life, he was experiencing how quickly social status can shift when your financial circumstances change. But it wasn't the practical hardships that seemed to have broken him. It was something deeper. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, his voice quieter now. "About us. About everything." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "I realized I've been taking you for granted. I never even thought about all the things you do for me, all the things you pay for. It was just always there, like it was supposed to be. I never saw it." That was what I had been waiting to hear. Not just an apology for the insult, but an acknowledgement of the underlying disease of entitlement that had been poisoning our relationship for years. He continued, admitting that the last 3 days had been the worst of his life, not just because of the inconvenience, but because he was forced to see a future without me in it, and it terrified him. He begged me to restore his accounts and give him his car back, promising, swearing, that he would be more respectful from now on. When he finally fell silent, all I felt was a profound sadness for both of us. Sadness that it had taken something this drastic to get his attention. "Taylor," I said softly, "I hear you, but apologies are easy words to say when you're in trouble. Actions are what matter." I told him that if he truly wanted my support back in his life, it came with conditions. "This isn't just about what happened at the restaurant," I explained. "This is about everything. The constant comparisons to Brad, the insults about my life and my choices, the attitude you bring every time you walk into my house. All of that has to stop. Not just for a week, but for good." "I will, Dad. I swear I will," he said, his voice full of desperation and sincerity. "I'll do anything." I told him I would have to think about it, I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I'm glad you called, and I'm glad we talked, but trust isn't a switch you can just flip back on. Things are going to be different now. You're going to have to earn it back." We ended the call, and I sank into my chair, emotionally exhausted but with a fragile flicker of hope in my heart. He had apologized. It was a real start. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that giving in now would undo everything. The lesson was only half learned. After the call with Taylor, I sat in my study for a long time just thinking. His apology felt real, raw, and born of genuine hardship. But I knew that a lesson learned under duress is fragile. If I restored everything to the way it was, what would stop him from slowly sliding back into his old habits once the memory of these 3 days faded? The entire point of this painful exercise was to create lasting change, not just to elicit a temporary apology. I decided on a middle path, one that showed I was willing to meet him halfway, but that also maintained the new boundaries I had fought so hard to establish. My first call the next morning was to the university. I authorized them to lift the hold on his student account, ensuring his tuition payments would go through and, more immediately, that he could access the campus meal plan. I was not going to let my son go hungry. His education and his basic well-being were non-negotiable, but that was as far as I was willing to go. The Honda remained in my garage. The credit card remained canceled. When I called Taylor to inform him of the decision, his reaction told me everything I needed to know. There was no argument, no complaint that it wasn't enough. There was only quiet, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Okay, Dad," he said. "Thank you, I understand." The old Taylor would have pushed for more, whining about how he needed his car or how unfair it was. This new, humbled Taylor seemed to understand that he was being given a gift, not having a right restored. I told him he could earn the other privileges back, but it would take time and consistent effort. With Taylor's situation provisionally handled, it was time to address the root cause of the problem: Sarah. I knew that any positive change in Taylor would be temporary if his mother continued to whisper poison in his ear. I called her later that day, my tone calm but resolute. I was no longer the defensive ex-husband. I was a father laying down the law. I made it crystal clear. Sarah, I said, we need to be on the same page about this. For Taylor's sake. I told her that I had reinstated his tuition account, but that was all. And I told her that my continued financial support for anything was now conditional. What does that mean, conditional? She asked, her voice wary. It means that if you continue to encourage Taylor to disrespect me, if you keep feeding him this narrative that I'm a loser and Brad is a saint, then the deal is off. I stated plainly, I will permanently withdraw all financial support. You need to decide what's more important to you, your ongoing war with me, or Taylor's education and future. She was furious, of course. She called it blackmail. She said I couldn't control what she said or what Taylor thought. Oh, I think you can, I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. You've done a remarkable job of influencing his opinion of me for the past 3 years. If you have the power to turn him against me, you have the power to encourage him to be respectful. The choice is yours. But know that if Taylor comes to my house with an attitude after spending the weekend with you, I will hold you directly responsible. For the first time in years, I had her complete and undivided attention. For so long, my feelings and my perspective had been completely irrelevant to her. But now, with Taylor's $30,000 a year education hanging in the balance, she was listening to every single word. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I laid out the new rules. No more bad-mouthing me in front of him. No more making comparisons between me and Brad. No more interference with my parental authority. She had to actively co-parent, not actively undermine. She didn't like the ultimatum, but she knew I was dead serious. After a long, tense silence, she reluctantly agreed to the terms. It wasn't a friendly agreement, but it was an agreement nonetheless. A fragile peace had been brokered, not by lawyers or mediators, but by a father who had finally decided to use the only leverage he had left. The board was reset. Now it was time to see how they would play the game. The weeks that followed were like waking up after a long, feverish illness. The world was the same, but everything felt different. The dynamic in our fractured family had been fundamentally altered. Taylor was learning, for the first time, how to live on a budget. Without a car or a credit card for impulsive purchases, he had to be strategic about his money. He told me during one of our calls that it was humiliating at first, having to explain to his friends why he couldn't just go out like he used to. It was a harsh but necessary dose of reality. Our phone conversations transformed. The bored, resentful tone was gone, replaced by a genuine interest in connecting. He started asking me about my work, my weekend plans, things he had never shown the slightest curiosity about before. He started saying thank you. When I sent him money specifically for his textbooks, I got a text detailing what he bought, thanking me for the support. Each thank you was a small brick being laid on a new foundation of respect. The most significant change, however, came about a month after the incident at the restaurant. Taylor called me on a Tuesday night. "Dad," he said, his voice hesitant, "I know it's not my weekend, but would it be okay if I came home? There's something important I want to talk to you about." This was completely unprecedented. For years, His visits had felt like a court-ordered punishment he had to endure. Now, he was asking to come home, to talk. I told him of course he could come. When he arrived that Friday, there was no sullen attitude, no burying himself in his phone. He walked in, put his bag down, and sat me down on the living room couch as if he were the one calling a family meeting. "Dad," he began, looking me straight in the eye, "I need you to understand why I was acting the way I was. It doesn't excuse it, but I need to explain." For the next hour, he was more honest with me than he had been in years. He explained that ever since the divorce, he had been carrying around this deep, simmering anger toward me. He admitted that he had blamed me for the marriage ending, for not fighting harder to keep the family together, even though he knew, intellectually, that it wasn't all my fault. He confessed that he used Brad as a weapon. He knew the constant comparisons hurt me, and that was the point. It was his misguided, destructive way of lashing out, of punishing me for the pain he was feeling. He also told me about the immense pressure he felt from Sarah to take her side, to see me as the villain she painted me to be. He said it was just easier to go along with it, easier to blame me because I wasn't the one constantly trying to manipulate him. Hearing him lay it all bare was both painful and a profound relief. It didn't erase the hurt, but it contextualized it. His cruelty hadn't come from a place of genuine hatred, but from unprocessed pain and divided loyalties. When he was finished, I didn't just accept his apology. I did something I hadn't done before. I let him see my own vulnerability. I told him how difficult the divorce had been for me, too. I told him about the lonely nights I'd spent worrying about him, about how deeply his words had cut me, how his rejection had felt like a failure on every level. For the first time, we weren't just a father and a rebellious son. We were two people talking honestly about our shared pain. We talked about Brad, and I told him I had no problem with him having a good relationship with his stepfather. In fact, I encouraged it. But, I said, that relationship can't come at the expense of ours. There is room in your life for both of us, as long as there is mutual respect. That conversation was the real turning point. It was more important than the frozen accounts, more important than taking the car. It was the moment we started to actually heal. The anger and resentment that had lived between us for so long finally had a voice, and in speaking it, we began to let it go. That honest, painful conversation was the turning point from which everything else grew. In the months that followed, our relationship didn't just revert to what it was before the divorce. It evolved into something new, something stronger. Our weekends together were completely transformed. Instead of counting the minutes until he could leave, Taylor started planning activities we could do together. We started going fishing again, and this time, there were no mentions of Brad's better boat. It was just us, the quiet lapping of the water, and easy conversation. We started working on projects around the house. I taught him how to fix a leaky faucet and how to build shelves for the garage. It was simple, practical stuff, but it was time spent together, building something tangible while we rebuilt something intangible. What amazed me most was when he started inviting his friends over. For years, he had acted as if my house was a source of embarrassment. Now, he was bringing his social circle into my home, and I overheard him one night telling a friend with pride about the deck repairs we'd done together. For the first time in a long time, I heard my son speak about his time with me in a positive light. Slowly, carefully, I began to restore his privileges, but each one came with new responsibilities. I established a clear system. If he continued to show respect and keep his grades up for a set period, he could earn things back. About 3 months after the incident, he had demonstrated enough consistent change that I felt comfortable giving him the car back. But it came with conditions. I handed him the keys and told him he was now responsible for paying his own insurance and gas with the money from his part-time job. The old tailor would have argued or complained about the new costs. The new tailor just nodded, a grateful look on his face, and said, "Okay, Dad, that's fair. Thank you." I also gave him a new credit card, but with a much lower limit and the strict understanding that it was for necessities and would be taken away immediately if he abused it. He accepted these terms without a single complaint. His gratitude was more powerful than any apology. The ripple effects extended to the rest of the family, too. Sarah, realizing I was serious, stopped her campaign of undermining me. Our conversations became less tense and more focused on what was actually best for Taylor. She even started encouraging him to be more respectful toward me. It wasn't a warm relationship, but it became a functional co-parenting one, which was more than I could have hoped for. And Brad, well, Brad seemed to have developed a new appreciation for my role in Taylor's life. Once he was faced with the reality of what it actually costs to support a college student, his arrogance softened into a quiet respect. Our few interactions became polite, even cordial. The fun stepdad persona was still there, but it was no longer used as a weapon against me. Looking back, I realized this whole ordeal wasn't just a lesson for Taylor. It was a lesson for me, too. I had been so consumed by divorce guilt, so afraid of being the father who let his son down, that I had allowed him to treat me in ways I would never tolerate from anyone else. I learned that providing financial support doesn't mean you have to accept disrespect. Setting firm boundaries isn't cruel. Sometimes, it's the greatest act of love a parent can offer. It was a painful choice, but it was necessary to reset our entire family dynamic. The relationship we have now is built on a foundation of mutual respect, and I am more optimistic about our future than I have been in years. What a journey. It's one of those stories that really sits with you, isn't it? It's about so much more than a single argument at a restaurant. It's about the silent contracts we form in our families, the ones where love and support are expected to flow one way, without the requirement of respect flowing back. The father in this story had to make an impossible choice: continue to enable his son's toxic behavior out of love and guilt, or risk severing the relationship completely to teach him a lesson about basic human decency. He chose the hard path, the one filled with sleepless nights and the pain of hearing his own son cry. But it makes you wonder about the very nature of tough love. It's a term we hear a lot, but what does it really mean? When does it cross the line from a necessary lesson into an act of cruelty? That's what I'd love to hear from you all about in the comments. Let's really talk about this. First, was the father ultimately right? I mean, taking the car is one thing, but freezing his son's meal plan, leaving him unable to buy food, did he go too far? Is there a point where a parent's lesson becomes an abuse of their financial power? Or was this the only language his son would have understood? And who is the real villain here? It's easy to point the finger at Taylor for his entitled, disrespectful behavior. But what about Sarah, the mother, who spent years actively poisoning her son against his own father? How much blame does she carry for creating the monster she then couldn't control? Or is it Brad, the smug stepfather, who happily reaped the benefits of being the fun guy while someone else paid all the real bills? Maybe the father himself was a part of the problem for letting the disrespect go on for so long. For anyone who has navigated the minefield of co-parenting after a difficult divorce, how do you handle it when your ex is actively working against you? Is it a battle you can ever truly win? Or do you just have to find a way to make a fragile peace for the sake of the kids? And maybe the biggest question of all, at what age do our kids become fully accountable for their words? Taylor is 19, a legal adult, a college student. Is that old enough to be held responsible for devastating comments? Or should he still be given the grace we give to teenagers who don't mean what they say? It's just a reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to draw a line in the sand. If this story made you feel understood, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Cocoa Table Reddit. Every follow and comment gives me the motivation to keep sharing these real, emotional stories with you. And if you have a story of your own, feel free to share it in the comments. I'm always here to listen.